Welcome to tonight's story. As you settle into bed, take a deep breath and let go of the day's worries. Tonight we travel to the kingdom of Lunaria, where darkness looms and a brave prince embarks on a quest to save his people. Let the story guide you to a place of calm and peace, where you can drift gently into sleep. Close your eyes, relax, and let the adventure begin. The kingdom of Lunaria had long been a realm of peace and prosperity, where golden fields stretched as far as the eye could see, and the people lived under the benevolent rule of King Aldric. His wisdom had guided them through many a trial, and his strength had been a bulwark against any who sought to bring harm to the land. But as the years passed, a shadow began to creep over Lunaria. Subtle at first, like the lengthening of twilight before the night fully claims the sky. The first signs were small, whispers of an unnatural chill in the air, crops that withered despite the season, and animals that fled from the woods as if pursued by some unseen terror. The wise men of the court consulted their ancient tomes, seeking answers, but the signs defied easy explanation. The people, once full of joy and laughter, began to speak in hushed tones, their eyes ever watching the darkening horizon. The shadow grew thicker, turning day into a dim, oppressive twilight, and the hearts of the bravest knights began to falter. In the heart of the kingdom, within the high walls of the castle, King Aldric lay bedridden, his once mighty form weakened by a mysterious illness. The court healers worked tirelessly, but no potion or spell could halt the wasting sickness that drained the king of his strength. As the king's condition worsened, so too did the shadow that loomed over Lunaria, as if the very life of the kingdom was bound to that of its ruler. Prince Eamon, the king's only son, watched helplessly as his father's health deteriorated. He had always been a dutiful son, but he was untested in battle, and the burden of leadership had yet to fall upon his shoulders. Yet now, with his father's life hanging by a thread, and the kingdom on the brink of despair, the weight of that burden grew heavier by the day. Eamon could see the fear in the eyes of the knights, and hear the desperation in the voices of the courtiers. They looked to him, not with confidence, but with a desperate hope that he might somehow save them from the encroaching darkness. It was then, in the depths of the castle's grand library, that an ancient scroll was discovered. The scroll, bound in cracked leather and yellowed with age, was found hidden in a forgotten alcove. Its discovery was heralded by the librarians as a sign, and they quickly brought it before the prince. The scroll spoke of a prophecy, one that foretold the rise of a great evil that would shroud the world in eternal darkness. But it also spoke of a way to resist this darkness, a legendary helm forged in the fires of the earth and imbued with the power of the gods. The Golden Helm of Valor, it was called, a relic of immense power that could grant its wearer the courage to face any foe and the strength to lead armies against the most fearsome of enemies. The scroll's words kindled a spark of hope in Prince Eamon's heart, a hope that had been dimmed by the shadow of his father's illness and the encroaching darkness. He knew deep within his soul that this helm was his destiny. The time had come for him to step forward, not just as a prince, but as a leader, a hero. The quest for the Golden Helm of Valor would be perilous, fraught with dangers that would test his resolve and his very spirit. But Eamon was determined. He would not let his father's kingdom fall into darkness. He would find the helm, no matter the cost, and save his people from the fate that threatened to engulf them all. And so, with a steely resolve, Prince Eamon prepared to embark on a journey that would take him to the farthest reaches of the known world, into lands where few had dared to tread. The fate of Lunaria rested upon his shoulders, and with the first light of dawn, he would set forth, the shadow of destiny trailing close behind. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale light upon the castle of Lunaria. The once vibrant banners now hung limply in the still air, their colours muted by the pervasive gloom that had settled over the kingdom. Despite the darkness, a sense of urgency filled the air as preparations were made for Prince Eamon's departure. The prince, clad in simple armour, stood in the courtyard, gazing at the horizon with a mixture of determination and trepidation. Today marked the beginning of his quest, a journey that would take him far from the comforts of home into the unknown. At his side stood his loyal companions, each chosen for their unique skills and unwavering loyalty to the crown. Sir Aldric, the most seasoned knight in the kingdom, stood tall and resolute, his scarred face a testament to the countless battles he had fought in defense of Lunaria. His eyes, however, softened as he looked at the young prince, recognizing both the weight of the burden Eamon carried and the promise of greatness within him. To Aldric's right was Eldoria, the kingdom's finest archer and tracker, whose keen eyes had never missed their mark. She was as swift as she was silent, with hair as dark as the night, and eyes that seemed to pierce the very soul. Eldoria had always been a solitary figure, preferring the wilds to the court, but her loyalty to the kingdom was unmatched. She had watched over Prince Eamon since they were children, though always from a distance, and now she would watch over him once more on this perilous journey. Cale, the youngest of the group, was a mage whose powers were still blossoming. Though his abilities were raw and sometimes unpredictable, there was a depth to his magic that hinted at untapped potential. His youthful exuberance often clashed with the solemnity of the task ahead. But his heart was pure, and his loyalty to Eamon was unwavering. Cale's presence brought a sense of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of youth and potential could shine through. The group had spent the night making final preparations, gathering supplies, and reviewing the map that would guide them to the Valley of Shadows, where their first trial awaited. The valley was a place of legend, feared even by the bravest of souls. It was said that the very air there was thick with fear, that those who entered would be forced to confront their deepest nightmares. But it was also the only path to the temple where the Golden Helm of Valor was hidden. Before the first light fully claimed the sky, King Aldric's chief advisor, an elderly sage named Thalion, approached the group. His long silver beard flowed over his robes, and his eyes, though dimmed with age, still held the wisdom of many lifetimes. Thalion placed a hand on Prince Eamon's shoulder, his grip firm despite the frailty of his frame. "Remember, young prince," Thalion said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to face it. The helm will grant you strength, but it is your heart that must lead the way." Eamon nodded, the sage's words settling into his soul like a seed. He understood the truth in them, that the helm was but a tool, an aid to the courage he must find within himself. As he looked at his companions, he felt a swell of gratitude. He was not alone in this quest. They would face the darkness together, and together they would overcome it. With a final glance at the castle where his ailing father lay, Eamon mounted his steed. His companions followed suit, and with the sun rising at their backs, they set forth on their journey. The road ahead was long and fraught with peril, but with every step they took, Eamon felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon him, and the stirrings of the courage he would need to bear it. The journey had begun, and there would be no turning back. The road to the Valley of Shadows was unforgiving, winding through jagged mountains and dense, tangled forests that seemed to whisper secrets from ages long past. As the days stretched into weeks, the once vibrant landscape became increasingly barren, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, and a heavy mist clung to the ground, muffling their footsteps and obscuring the path ahead. Prince Eamon rode at the front of the group, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the dark silhouette of the valley loomed like a yawning maw. The closer they drew to their destination, the more the atmosphere around them seemed to change. The very air crackled with tension, as if the valley itself was aware of their approach, waiting to test their resolve. "We're close now," Elara whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind that howled through the narrow pass. Her sharp eyes scanned the landscape, every muscle in her body tense, ready for whatever might lie ahead. Sir Alaric nodded grimly. "The Valley of Shadows. Few have dared to enter, and fewer still have returned. This is where our true test begins." Kale, usually quick to make light of any situation, was uncharacteristically silent. His youthful face, normally full of energy, was now set in a mask of concentration as he clutched his staff tightly. The air hummed with the faint traces of his magic, a protective barrier that he had woven around them, but even this offered little comfort in the face of the unknown. As they crossed the threshold into the valley, the change was immediate and overwhelming. The light of day, already dimmed by the encroaching darkness that plagued the kingdom, was swallowed completely by the shadows that cloaked the valley. It was as though they had stepped into another world, a world where time stood still and fear reigned supreme. The mist thickened, swirling around them like a living thing, and with it came the first whispers. Soft at first, barely more than a rustle of leaves, but growing louder with every step they took. The voices were distorted, echoing in the cold air, and soon they began to take form, warping into familiar tones. Loved ones, lost comrades, old enemies. They spoke of failures, of fears long buried, of doubts that gnawed at the edges of the mind. Eamon felt the weight of those words pressing down on him, each one like a stone added to the burden he carried. The valley played upon his deepest insecurities, dredging up the nightmares he had tried to suppress. He saw his father's lifeless body, the kingdom engulfed in darkness, and himself standing alone, unable to protect those he loved. The helm he sought seemed a distant dream, a goal far beyond his reach. Elara gasped beside him, her bow clattering to the ground as she clutched her head, overwhelmed by the visions. Sir Alaric's sword trembled in his hand, the knight's eyes wide with the horror of relived battles. The faces of those he had lost flashing before him. Even Cale, with all his burgeoning power, was brought to his knees by the whispers, his magic faltering as fear threatened to consume him. But it was in that moment, when all seemed lost, that Eamon remembered Thalion's words. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to face it. Gritting his teeth, Eamon forced himself to stand tall. The voices clawed at his mind, but he refused to let them take hold. He reached out, grasping Elara's hand and pulling her to her feet. "We must push forward," he urged, his voice steady despite the storm within him. "We cannot let the darkness win." Sir Alaric, regaining his composure, nodded in agreement, his grip on his sword tightening. Cale rose shakily, his eyes glowing faintly with renewed determination. Together they began to walk, one step at a time, through the valley that sought to break them. The shadows pressed closer, but with each step, Eamon felt a flicker of the courage that the helm would bring. They would survive this trial, not because of the helm, but because of the strength they found within themselves. The valley might test them, but it would not defeat them. As they reached the end of the valley, the darkness began to recede, and the whispers faded into silence. They emerged from the shadows, their bond stronger, their resolve unshakable. The trials of the Valley of Shadows had been harrowing, but they had passed through it together, and the Golden Helm of Valor was now within their reach. Beyond the Valley of Shadows, the landscape shifted once more. The air grew warmer, the mist dissipated, and before the group rose an imposing structure, an ancient temple hewn from the living rock of the mountain. Its walls were etched with runes that pulsed with a faint golden light, and its towering doors, carved with depictions of great battles and forgotten heroes, seemed to vibrate with the weight of ages. This was the final resting place of the Golden Helm of Valor, and the temple's very presence exuded a sense of sacredness and solemnity. Prince Eamon dismounted, his gaze fixed on the temple's entrance. He felt the pulse of something ancient, something powerful, resonating through the ground beneath his feet. This was what they had journeyed so far to find, the source of the courage that would save his kingdom. But as they approached the entrance, a cold wind swept through the valley, and a deep, resonant voice echoed from within the temple, stopping them in their tracks. "Who dares to seek the Helm of Valor?" the voice intoned, carrying with it the weight of countless centuries. The companions exchanged uneasy glances, but Eamon stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "I am Prince Eamon of Lunaria, son of King Aldric, and I seek the helm to save my kingdom from the darkness that threatens to consume it." Silence followed his declaration, the air thick with anticipation. Then, from the shadows of the temple, a figure emerged, a tall, spectral knight, clad in ancient armor that shimmered with an ethereal light. His face was hidden behind a helm, but his eyes glowed with a cold blue flame. This was the guardian of the helm, a warrior bound by oath to protect the relic from those deemed unworthy. "Many have come before you," the guardian said, his voice a low rumble. "Many have sought the helm, but none have proven worthy. The helm is not for the faint of heart, nor for those driven by greed or fear. Only one who possesses true courage may claim it. If you wish to take the helm, you must prove your worth in battle." Eamon's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, his mind racing. He had faced fear in the Valley of Shadows, but this was different. This was a test not of his resolve, but of his skill and his honor. The Guardian's challenge was clear. Defeat him in combat, and the helm would be his. The prince stepped forward, drawing his sword with a steady hand. His companions moved to follow, but the Guardian raised a hand, halting them. "This is his trial alone," he said. "The courage of one will be tested here, not the strength of many." Eamon nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. He took a deep breath, centering himself, and then the battle began. The Guardian moved with a speed and grace that belied his spectral form, his sword flashing through the air with a deadly precision. Eamon met each strike with his own, the clash of steel ringing out in the stillness of the temple. The Guardian's strength was immense, and each blow sent shocks through Eamon's arms. But the prince did not falter. He fought not with anger or desperation, but with the calm focus that Thalion had instilled in him. This was not just a fight for the helm. It was a fight for his kingdom, for his people, and for his own destiny. As the battle raged on, Eamon found himself driven back, the Guardian's relentless assault pushing him to the edge of his limits. But just as despair began to creep in, a memory surfaced, a memory of his father teaching him to fight as a boy. "Remember, Eamon," King Aldric had said, "true strength lies not in the sword, but in the heart that wields it." With a surge of determination, Eamon pushed back, his movements fueled by a deep, unwavering resolve. He parried the Guardian's next strike, and with a swift, decisive move, he disarmed his opponent, sending the spectral sword clattering to the ground. The Guardian stepped back, his glowing eyes dimming as he regarded Eamon with a newfound respect. "You have proven your worth, Prince Eamon," he said, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "The helm is yours. May it grant you the courage you seek." With that, the Guardian's form began to dissolve, his spirit finally at peace. The great doors of the temple creaked open, revealing a pedestal upon which the Golden Helm of Valor rested, its surface gleaming with a light that seemed to come from within. Eamon approached the helm, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and relief. As he reached out and lifted it from the pedestal, he felt a surge of power, a warmth that spread through his entire being. The helm was heavy in his hands, but it felt right, as if it had been waiting for him all along. He turned to his companions, who watched with pride and admiration. The Golden Helm of Valor was now his, and with it, the courage to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The next step of their journey would be fraught with danger, but with the helm in hand, Eamon knew they were one step closer to saving Lunaria. With the Golden Helm of Valor now in his possession, Prince Eamon felt a newfound strength coursing through his veins. The warmth of the helm's power wrapped around him like a protective cloak, bolstering his courage and sharpening his senses. Yet, even as the helm granted him the fortitude he needed, Eamon knew that the true test was still to come. The journey home would take them through the Darklands, a desolate wasteland where the shadows of despair lingered like a curse upon the land. The group set out from the temple at dawn, the golden light of the rising sun a stark contrast to the oppressive gloom that awaited them. As they ventured deeper into the Darklands, the landscape around them began to change. The trees grew sparse and twisted, their branches reaching out like the skeletal hands of the damned. The earth beneath their feet was cracked and barren, devoid of life, and the air was thick with a heavy, cloying fog that obscured the horizon. It wasn't long before they began to encounter the creatures of the Darklands, twisted, malformed beings born from the very shadows that plagued the land. These creatures were not of flesh and bone, but of darkness itself, their forms shifting and writhing as they moved with unnatural speed. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent red light, and their claws were sharp as blades, capable of rending through steel and flesh alike. Eamon and his companions fought with all the skill and determination they possessed, their swords and arrows cutting through the creatures as they advanced. But for every beast they felled, more seemed to rise from the darkness, their numbers seemingly endless. The battle was relentless, the creatures pressing in from all sides, and for the first time, Eamon felt the weight of the helm's power truly bear down upon him. The courage it granted was not without its cost. Each swing of his sword, each strike he delivered, drained him of energy, leaving him increasingly weary as the fight wore on. Chaol's magic flared brightly in the dim light, his spells crackling through the air with a force that sent the creatures scattering. But even the young mage was beginning to tire, his face pale and drawn from the effort of maintaining his protective barriers. Ilara's arrows flew true, striking down the creatures with deadly precision. But her quiver was beginning to empty, and the tension in her bowstring grew tighter with every shot. Sir Aldric, ever the stalwart knight, fought with the strength and resolve of a man who had faced countless battles before. Yet even he could not hide the exhaustion that was beginning to creep into his limbs. The Darklands sapped the very life from them, feeding on their fear and despair. And it was only through sheer force of will that they continued to push forward. As the day wore on, the creatures grew bolder, their attacks more coordinated. Eamon knew they could not keep this pace forever. They needed to find shelter, a place to regroup and recover. But the Darklands offered no refuge, no sanctuary from the onslaught of darkness. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, Eamon felt a strange pull within him, a whisper that seemed to emanate from the helm itself. It guided his gaze to a distant outcrop of rocks, partially obscured by the fog. With a shout to his companions, Eamon led them toward the outcrop, fighting their way through the horde of creatures that sought to block their path. When they finally reached the rocks, they discovered a narrow cave entrance, hidden from sight. Without hesitation, they dove inside, the darkness of the cave a welcome respite from the chaos outside. The creatures clawed at the entrance, but the narrow opening kept them at bay, their frustrated shrieks echoing through the night. Inside the cave, Eamon and his companions collapsed against the cool stone walls, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The helm had led them to safety, but the journey had taken its toll. As they sat in the dim light, Eamon realized that the helm's power, while immense, could not be relied upon alone. The courage it granted was a tool, not a crutch, and the true strength they needed would come from within. "We're close now," Eamon said. his voice hoarse but filled with determination. We must rest, gather our strength. Tomorrow, we continue our journey, and we will not stop until the darkness is driven from our land. His companions nodded, their faces weary but resolute. They had faced the horrors of the Darklands and survived. And though the road ahead was still fraught with danger, they knew they would see it through to the end. Together, they would overcome the darkness, and the light of Lunaria would shine once more. The next morning dawned with a grim determination that matched the hearts of Eamon and his companions. After a brief but much-needed rest in the shelter of the cave, they pressed onward through the Darklands, the Golden Helm of Valor glowing faintly under the shroud of mist. The land grew increasingly desolate, the very earth cracked and lifeless, as if the darkness had drained all vitality from it. But the helm's warmth and light guided them, giving them the strength to push forward. At last, after what felt like an eternity of struggle, the mist began to thin, and the familiar outlines of Lunaria's capital emerged from the gloom. But the sight that met their eyes was far from reassuring. The once proud city was now a fortress under siege, its walls darkened by the shadow that had spread from the valley. The fields that surrounded the city had withered into barren wastelands, and the castle, which had once stood as a beacon of hope, was now shrouded in an oppressive darkness that pulsed with malevolent energy. Eamon's heart clenched at the sight of his home in such a state. The people of Lunaria, once filled with hope and prosperity, were now huddled within the city's walls, their faces pale with fear and despair. The streets, once bustling with life, were eerily silent. The only sound the distant clamour of the city's defenders as they fought to hold back the encroaching darkness. "We must reach the castle," Eamon said, his voice firm despite the dread that gnawed at him. "The source of the darkness lies there, in the heart of our home. We must face it if we are to save the kingdom." Sir Aldric nodded, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "We'll need to rally the remaining forces. The people need to see that their prince has returned, and that he brings hope with him." As they approached the city gates, the guards, weary and battle-worn, recognized the prince and quickly ushered them inside. Word of Eamon's return spread like wildfire, and soon the people of Lunaria began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the sight of their prince, the Golden Helm of Valor gleaming atop his head. Eamon stood before them, his voice carrying over the hushed crowd. "People of Lunaria," he called, "the darkness that has plagued our land is not invincible. We have fought it before, and we will fight it again. I have journeyed far and returned with the helm that will grant us the courage to stand against this evil. Together we will reclaim our home." A murmur of hope rippled through the crowd, and the people began to rally, their spirits lifting at the sight of their prince and the legendary helm. Eamon's words were a spark in the darkness, igniting the courage that had long been buried beneath fear and despair. With renewed resolve, Eamon led the defenders through the city, organizing them for the final battle that was to come. The streets filled with the clamor of preparation. Armor was donned, swords were sharpened, and the people, from the oldest veteran to the youngest recruit, readied themselves for the fight of their lives. But even as the city's defenders rallied, the darkness grew stronger, pressing ever closer to the castle. From the depths of the shadow, twisted creatures emerged, more fearsome and numerous than before. They clawed at the walls, their shrieks filling the air, their relentless assault a testament to the power of the evil that sought to consume Lunaria. As the final battle began, Eamon stood at the forefront, the Golden Helm of Valor glowing brightly, its light cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Sir Aldric fought by his side, his sword a blur of steel as he cleaved through the ranks of the dark creatures. Ilara's arrows flew true, each shot finding its mark, while Kael's magic crackled through the air, blasting the creatures back with waves of pure energy. The battle raged on, the defenders of Lunaria holding their ground with a ferocity born of desperation and hope. But the darkness was relentless, its power overwhelming, and soon it became clear that they were being driven back, inch by inch, toward the castle's gates. It was then that Eamon knew the time had come for the final confrontation. The source of the darkness lay within the castle, in the very heart of the kingdom. And it was there that he would find the true enemy, the sorcerer who had brought this plague upon them. "Hold the line!" Eamon shouted to his companions as he broke away from the battle, his eyes fixed on the darkened castle. "I must end this here and now." With a final look at his companions, Sir Aldric, Ilara, Kael, each of them fighting with every ounce of strength they had, Eamon steeled himself and plunged into the heart of the darkness, the helm's light guiding his way. The fate of Lunaria rested on his shoulders, and the true battle was about to begin. The castle halls, once grand and filled with light, were now shrouded in an almost tangible darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. The very air was thick and heavy, as if the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating any hope that dared to enter. But Eamon pressed on, the Golden Helm of Valor glowing fiercely upon his brow, its light pushing back the shadows that clawed at him from every side. Each step echoed ominously in the silence, and with every echo, Eamon could feel the weight of the darkness growing stronger, more oppressive. He knew that the source of this evil was near, hidden deep within the castle that had been his home. And as he neared the throne room, the epicenter of the darkness, the air grew colder, the light of the helm dimming slightly as if it too felt the overwhelming presence of the enemy within. At last, he reached the great doors of the throne room. their once majestic carvings now twisted and warped by the dark magic that had taken hold. Eamon hesitated for just a moment, his hand resting on the cold wood, before he pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The throne room was unrecognizable. The grand tapestries that had once adorned the walls were now tattered and blackened, and the great windows that had once let in the warm light of the sun were shattered, replaced by a gaping void that seemed to suck in all light. At the far end of the room, where his father's throne once stood as a symbol of justice and strength, now sat a figure cloaked in shadow, its form barely visible in the gloom. The figure rose slowly, the darkness swirling around it like a living thing, and as it stepped into the faint light of the helm, Eamon saw the twisted visage of the sorcerer who had brought this curse upon his land. The sorcerer's eyes burned with a cold blue fire, and his lips curled into a cruel smile as he regarded the young prince. "So, you have returned, Prince Eamon," the sorcerer hissed, his voice like the rasp of a blade on stone. "I had hoped you might perish in the Darklands, but it seems you are more resilient than I anticipated." Eamon tightened his grip on his sword, his heart pounding in his chest. "This ends now," he declared, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at him. "You have brought ruin to my kingdom, poisoned my people with your darkness. But I will not let you take Lunaria." The sorcerer laughed, a sound that sent chills down Eamon's spine. Bold words for a boy who has yet to see the true power of darkness. "The helm you wear may grant you courage, but it cannot save you from what is to come." With a wave of his hand, the sorcerer summoned the darkness to him, and it coalesced into a writhing mass of shadowy tendrils that lashed out at Eamon, seeking to engulf him. But Eamon was ready. The helm flared with a brilliant light, and he charged forward, his sword slicing through the tendrils with ease. The darkness recoiled, hissing as it retreated, and Eamon pressed the attack, driving the sorcerer back. But the sorcerer was not so easily defeated. He raised his hands, and the very floor of the throne room began to tremble. The shadows deepened, and from the cracks in the stone, more creatures of darkness emerged, their red eyes glowing with malevolence as they surrounded Eamon. The prince fought valiantly, cutting down the creatures one by one, but they kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. "You cannot win, Eamon," the sorcerer taunted, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The darkness is eternal. It will consume you, just as it has consumed your father and your kingdom." Eamon gritted his teeth, his arms aching from the relentless battle. The light of the helm flickered, dimming as the strain of the fight began to take its toll. But in that moment, he remembered the words of Thalion. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to face it." With a roar, Eamon gathered his strength and charged at the sorcerer, the helm's light flaring once more. He leapt into the air, his sword raised high, and brought it down with all his might. The blade struck true, cutting through the sorcerer's defenses and piercing his dark heart. The sorcerer let out a scream of agony, the sound reverberating through the throne room as the darkness around him began to unravel. The creatures dissolved into wisps of shadow, and the heavy gloom that had suffocated the castle began to lift. The sorcerer crumpled to the ground, his form dissolving into nothingness as the darkness that had sustained him was banished by the light of the helm. Eamon stood over the fallen sorcerer, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the Golden Helm of Valor still shining brightly upon his brow. The throne room, once a place of despair, was now filled with the soft glow of dawn as the first rays of sunlight broke through the shattered windows. The darkness had been defeated, and with it, the curse that had plagued Lunaria. Eamon had faced his greatest fear and emerged victorious. But even as he stood there, victorious and exhausted, he knew that his journey was not yet over. The kingdom needed to be rebuilt, and his people needed a leader. With a heavy heart but a renewed sense of purpose, Eamon turned away from the fallen sorcerer and made his way back through the castle. The battle for Lunaria had been won, but the fight for its future had only just begun. As Prince Eamon emerged from the depths of the castle, the dawn of a new day broke over Lunaria. The darkness that had once gripped the kingdom in its suffocating grasp had been vanquished, and with it, the ominous clouds that had obscured the sky began to dissipate. Golden sunlight streamed through the cracks in the castle's ancient walls, bathing the courtyard in a warm, welcoming glow. It was as though the very land itself breathed a sigh of relief, free at last from the malevolent force that had threatened to destroy it. Eamon paused at the castle's entrance, his gaze sweeping over the city below. The streets, which had been silent and lifeless, were now filled with the sounds of the people emerging from their homes. They looked up in wonder, their faces turned toward the sun, as if seeing it for the first time in years. The heavy weight of despair had been lifted, replaced by a sense of hope that had not been felt in Lunaria for many a long year. His companions, Sir Aldric, Elara, and Cale, soon joined him, their faces weary but filled with the quiet satisfaction of victory. The battle had taken its toll on all of them, but they had survived, and more importantly, they had triumphed. The Golden Helm of Valor still rested upon Eamon's brow, its light now gentle and steady, a symbol of the courage that had seen them through the darkest of times. "We did it," Cale murmured, his voice tinged with awe as he looked out over the city. "The darkness is gone." Eamon nodded, though his thoughts were far from the victory they had achieved. His mind was already turning to the task that lay ahead. Rebuilding the kingdom, restoring the lives that had been torn apart by the sorcerer's curse. The helm had granted him the courage to face the darkness, But it was his responsibility now to lead his people into the light. "The battle may be over," Eamon said, his voice firm, "but our work is just beginning. The kingdom is in need of healing, and we must be the ones to guide it." Sir Alaric placed a hand on Eamon's shoulder, his grip strong and reassuring. "You've proven yourself a true leader, Eamon. Your father would be proud of you. We all are." Eamon felt a pang of sorrow at the mention of his father, King Aldric, who had fallen ill under the Shadow's curse. But with the darkness now banished, there was hope that his father might recover. And even if he did not, Eamon knew that he was ready to take up the mantle of leadership, to fulfill the role that destiny had placed before him. Together, the four companions descended the steps of the castle and made their way into the heart of the city. The people of Lunaria gathered around them, their expressions a mixture of relief, gratitude, and newfound hope. Whispers of "the prince has returned and the darkness is gone" rippled through the crowd, growing louder with each passing moment until the air was filled with cheers and cries of joy. Eamon addressed them, his voice carrying over the throng. "People of Lunaria, the darkness that plagued our land has been vanquished, but we must not rest on this victory alone. Together, we will rebuild our kingdom. We will restore what was lost and forge a future brighter than any we have known." The people responded with a roar of approval, their spirits lifted by the promise of a new beginning. Eamon's heart swelled with pride and determination as he looked out at the faces of his people. His people, who had endured so much and yet stood resilient in the face of adversity. As the sun continued to rise, casting its golden rays over the city, Eamon knew that the journey that had begun with a quest for the Golden Helm of Valor had only just begun. The helm had led him to victory, but it was the courage within himself and his companions that had truly won the day. And it was that same courage that would guide Lunaria into a new era of peace and prosperity. Eamon removed the helm and held it high, its golden light shimmering in the morning sun. "May the courage of this helm," he declared, "be the courage that lives in each of us as we face the challenges of tomorrow. For Lunaria, for our people, and for the future we will build together." The crowd erupted in cheers once more, and as Eamon looked into their eyes, he saw not just hope, but the strength of a united kingdom ready to rise from the ashes of darkness. The dawn of a new era had begun, and with it, the promise of a brighter, more prosperous future for all. And so, with the Golden Helm of Valor as a symbol of the courage that had saved them, Prince Eamon led his people into the light, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. The darkness had been defeated, and Lunaria would stand strong.